In this episode, I'm going to be working on a piece of game art I drew just for some practice in working with layers and colors, and just to show people on YouTube what I'm doing. So, right now I'm using my stylus to draw outlines of the map. And I'm just drawing them in whatever color I feel like, because of course I can come back and change them later. So, I'm just drawing a landscape. I have one column, I have a ground over to the right, and a little hanging thing, just to try to make it look more natural and stuff. But I'm taking a stylistic approach because I'm drawing with sort of rectangles, but I'm using my stylus to draw them so it looks more natural, but it looks kind of stylized. So I'm also doing this for all the background layers. So as you can see, I took the foreground layer, I added the color to it, and now I'm doing the same for the background layers. And my process is just sketch out the outline and then fill it in with the brush, and then I have a pretty nice looking landscape. And I find that the background layers add so much to a level that you literally can't go without them. You can't just create the level and not have any of the background elements, because the world will look super flat and you really don't want that. So right now I'm just picking a background color, and notice how I'm switching the hue and saturation of the layers as I go. I already picked out a color palette before the video because I didn't want to spend the time on that, but actually this color palette is from an unreleased Scratch game that will never be released, but it was a pretty cool exercise in art on Scratch. So now I'm just drawing the final layer, and as you can see, I'm trying to make it so the layers kind of complement each other. And yeah, you don't want the layers to be right on top of each other, because then there's nothing interesting for the player to see. You kind of want every single layer to spill through. And right there, that's the final layer. So now I'm just making sure that they're all on the correct layer. As you can see, I'm constantly moving them in the video. But finally, I'm actually adding a foreground layer, and I try to make this one a little bigger. Don't try to block too much of the level, because in a game, this is in front of the player, and I don't want to actually block what the player is trying to walk on. Now I'm just going back and I'm fixing some of the details I slightly messed up when I was drawing it, because my stylus is not that precise. It would be more precise to draw rectangles, but it looks less natural that way. So I like using the style of the stylus to make my rectangles. And I like the look it produces a lot better. So now I'm taking my bush brush, and I've used this several times. I use it in a lot of my games. It's a very useful brush. I created it a while ago, but I'm just kind of adding a little bit of like moss or grass around the edges of the level. Doesn't really matter what faces I add this on, because it could be moss, so it can grow kind of anywhere it wants to, wherever there's light. So I kind of just throw it around on different parts, and then of course I have to do the same on all of the background layers. So I'm just going back into the second layer, then the third layer, and then the fourth layer. I'm just adding more and more pieces of grass around the entire drawing. So as you can see, I'm just finishing up the last blue layer. Actually, there's another blue layer, but yeah, I'm finishing up the layer. And then I come to the foreground, just make the brush a slight bit bigger because the foreground is closer. And then now I'm going to move on to the detailing. I think I messed up right here. I messed up I drew on the wrong layer, so I had to go back and I had to fix it. Very unfortunate. But I'm able to now add some extra details. So in this one I'm adding hanging vines, and this is just a little hanging brush that I have, and I just kind of place it places, and I repeat the process, add it in background layers just like I did with the other one. Now note that I'm using the same brushes, but the landscape looks pretty unique. Well, actually it doesn't look that unique yet, but how I make it unique is by adding certain elements. Like in this, I'm adding some spikes for the main layer. And this allows me to make the layers look a little more unique. If you want it to look really unique, you can add special things like perhaps an elevator or a house or something. But I'm just doing a very basic one, doesn't have anything really unique. And that's just what I'm trying to do, just to demonstrate how to draw some simple game art. And if you look in here, I'm drawing some just basic vines. And all I'm doing is I'm turning up my smoothing on my brush quite considerably, and I'm just sketching kind of a curvy line. And I draw these little hanging things off the vine, which is kind of essentially moss growing off the vine, is I just turn my brush flow and opacity to my pressure sensitivity on my stylus, and then I kind of just control the pressure with my hand essentially, and I'm able to make these little hanging things that look pretty nice. Okay, so now we're in the almost final stage. I like to add a little, some people may not like this, but I like to do it. I add a little comic book style by adding an overlay with a grunge texture. And of course, I also need to add my bloom, because what is a game without bloom? And all I'm doing is I'm just changing the levels, blurring it out, and setting an overlay filter. And I just add everything together. And of course I gotta turn it down because that bloom is way too high. And all I do now is I add a camera raw filter, and we're done. So this is just my basic game art. This is not really what I do for everything, but this is just basically what I like to do when I'm starting out a little piece of game art. So thank you all for watching, and I hope you enjoyed and hope you learned something.